Today's critique examines a submitted manuscript that challenges mainstream historical narrative, specifically focusing on the Emmett Till case and the broader history of lynchings in America. So a key theme running through this material seems to be the re-examination of established fact, particularly relying on the Justice Department findings regarding Timothy Tyson's book and Carolyn Bryant's supposed recantation. But what happens to the argument's credibility when it shifts from legal documents to assumptions about genetics?
Yeah, that's really the big question here. Relying on the criminal history of the subject's father introduces a logical fallacy that inadvertently undermines the factual rigor of the surrounding arguments.
Right.
I mean, the author does this incredibly thorough job tracking down the investigative paper trail from 1955. But the weakness really surfaces when the text argues that Louis Till's court-martial and, his execution for violence overseas makes it more likely that a 14-year-old Emmett would engage in similar conduct.
Which is just a huge leap.
It is. It's a genetic fallacy. And you have to think about the audience the author's actively trying to persuade. They are trying to get the reader to be fiercely skeptical, right? To be strictly fact-based.
Yeah, and relying on guilt by association, it kind of, it distracts from the genuinely strong, concrete evidence presented.
Exactly. Like the FBI investigation into the Tyson audio tapes. That is great stuff. So the suggestion here is to anchor the credibility of the counter-narrative strictly in verifiable timeline, trial transcripts, and official reports. You have to deliberately strip away speculative character attacks that rely on family history.
So getting into concrete examples, the author spends a whole paragraph detailing Louis Till's incarceration alongside Ezra Pound.
Right, yeah.
And they even include Pound's poetic verse about him. So should we just cut that entirely?
I definitely suggest entirely cutting that Ezra Pound paragraph. I mean, yes, it's an interesting historical footnote, but it serves absolutely no functional purpose in proving the mechanics of what happened between Emmett Till and Carolyn Bryant.
Okay, so we reallocate that word count then.
Yes, precisely. You take those freed up words and expand on the quotes from the 2021 Washington Post article. You can detail exactly how the Department of Justice found no recantation on the historian's single provided interview tape.
Wow. Yeah, that makes the argument so much stronger.
It really does.
It just keeps the reader completely locked into that legally driven mindset.
Totally.
Well, moving on to the structure and flow of the piece, the material makes a strong case for revisiting 1955 by highlighting specific FBI investigations, but I'm noticing a jarring leap when the text suddenly jumps back to the 1800s and references the frontier.
Oh yeah, it gives you major rhetorical whiplash.
It feels like we're attempting to cleanly map a 20th century civil rights catalyst onto a 19th century cattle rustler without building a bridge first.
Which is a major issue for the flow. The abrupt historical leap from a mid-20th century case to 19th century frontier justice fractures the narrative through line and risks confusing the core argument.
Because the context is it's vastly different.
Right. The weakness here is that the text pivots straight from the Emmett Till story into a sweeping redefinition of lynchings as mob justice or frontier justice. And it does this without acknowledging the massive chronological, political, and contextual gap between 1955 Mississippi and the Wild West.
It's almost like flattening history.
Exactly. Conflating Jim Crow-era violence with colonial-era justice without a clear transitional framework makes the argument feel completely disjointed. I mean, it assumes an act of vigilante violence in 1840 is driven by the exact same motives as in 1955.
So what's the fix here? How do we construct that scaffolding for the reader?
The suggestion is to build a distinct thematic and chronological bridge, one that explicitly acknowledges the different eras of American history. You want to separate the racially charged atmosphere of the 1950s South from colonial or frontier-era mob justice, showing how the practice evolved over time.
Okay, and as a concrete example of how to actually do that on the page, maybe introduce a transitional paragraph right after the Emmett Till conclusion?
Yes, that's perfect. You could write something like, while the Till case represents the highly specific racially charged atmosphere of the mid-20th century South, understanding the broader terminology requires looking back a century earlier.
That instantly validates the reader's understanding of 1955 while, giving them a smooth transition.
Exactly.
But then, right after that, we run into the Lonesome Dove reference.
Right, the TV miniseries.
Yeah,
The author uses the fiction of Lonesome Dove to retroactively explain away 20th century events.
Which completely undermines the empirical tone they've been building. So the concrete step is to cut the Lonesome Dove reference entirely. Instead, use the Tuskegee University statistic that the author already brought up, noting that 27% of white victims between 1882 and 1968 were lynched.
Right. Use that actual data point to explore how the demographic makeup of victims shifted over time.
Exactly. Stick to the hard data. Don't use Hollywood to explain history.
Which brings us to the tone and style of the manuscript. As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that the media presents a simplified pie chart where 100% of historical lynchings are racial.
Right. That's the core premise they're pushing against.
But by actively countering this, does the text fall into its own trap of speaking in absolute certainties where data just doesn't exist?
It absolutely does. Utilizing sweeping assumptions to fill historical data gaps weakens the persuasive power of the critique and risks alienating constructively skeptical readers.
Because, the author cites the Tuskegee Institute's empirical data really well.
Yes, that is a huge strength. But the weakness is that almost immediately after admitting a total lack of data prior to the 19th century, the text uses absolute speculative phrasing. Like, they say, "We can confidently say," or "We can assume that they were not lynched for racial reasons."
Which violates the whole premise of questioning everything.
Exactly. You just spent pages telling the reader to be a ruthless auditor of facts. Telling the reader what to assume now is a huge misstep. It breaks trust.
So the suggestion is to soften that definitive language, right?
Yes. Soften the language to maintain an investigative, inquisitive tone. The text should invite the reader to question the historical narrative alongside the author. It should not be dictating unprovable conclusions about eras with zero surviving data.
So practically speaking, on the page, instead of writing, "We can confidently say that most of the 27% of white victims were not lynched for racial reasons," we revise the text to ask a probing question.
Spot on.
Like, what does this 27% demographic tell us about the diverse motivations behind these acts?
Yes, notice how that preserves the reader's autonomy. And you can apply that exact same fix to the missing colonial data. Frame the lack of data as a historical mystery.
Right. So change, "There is good reason to suspect a large majority were white." Change that to, "Because we lack definitive data from the early 19th century, it leaves vital room to question the prevailing assumptions about early American mob justice."
Perfect. That turns a lack of data into a rhetorical asset instead of a liability.
Well, to succinctly recap the 3 actionable steps here. Number 1, removing the logical fallacy regarding the father's history to maintain factual rigor.
Yeah, cutting the Ezra Pound stuff is crucial.
Number 2, building a clear chronological bridge between the 1955 case and the 19th century frontier era to fix the structural leaps.
Using the Tuskegee data instead of a fictional TV show, of course.
Right. And number 3, replacing absolute speculative assumptions with inquisitive analysis to strengthen the overall tone.
I want to briefly thank the listener for submitting such a complex, thought-provoking manuscript. It really was a great read.
Absolutely. We invite you to revise your text and submit it back for another round of feedback. We would love to see where this goes.